Hey everyone, I apologize for the inconsistent upload schedule. The holiday season is pretty hectic, but in spite of the opening day happening today, I thought I would upload a video about all the contract extensions that have happened today, that happened the past week. I thought that would be something interesting to talk about. And I'm likely going to post a video just recapping the two games that happened on opening night, so stay tuned for that tomorrow, likely, or later today. So without further ado, let's just get into each of these signings pretty quickly, so that way we can get through all of them. So this first one is not part of that 2017 draft class where all those players took extensions today yesterday on December 21st, but it's rather Rudy Gobert, who re-upped on a 5-year, $205 million contract. Now, the interest and the perspective of this deal is pretty skewed. It kind of depends on your take on Rudy Gobert and a person's specific feelings about his game, his ability to play around the rim as a defender, be one of the best interior defenders, and just be very versatile down there. Now, the issue with it is that he's not a very good offensive player. He doesn't really have a versatile game down there. He can't really shoot. The only thing he can really do is kind of some interesting post moves down there. But at the end of the day, in the bubble during the playoff, he kind of got busted by Nikola Jokic. That's something that has to be noted for sure. So, in spite of that, I think it's a little bit of an overpay, and he admitted that he didn't take the supermax, so that way his teammates the Jazz could put better teammates around him, and they could use that for other purposes for the sake of the team's success. But I kind of think it's a little bit of an overpay. I mean, we kind of look at guys like that are just offensively, strictly offense, and they get max contracts. I mean, James Harden is not necessarily known as a defender necessarily. So, and as much as people don't want to admit that Rudy Gobert is a very good offensive player, and he's not, his defensive impact is really important. And just the fact that Donovan Mitchell can make up so much of the offensive liability that Rudy Gobert is, I think it's going to be okay. I mean, they had to make this deal. That's another thing they have to think about. But yeah, that's just it's an okay deal. Utah doesn't bring in a lot of big time free agents, so being able to re-sign a guy like him, one of the best defensive players, an All NBA caliber player for three-time All NBA, by the way, it's always a good thing. Now I'm going to get into the 2017 contract extensions that are not the Supermax guys that signed earlier this year. So Kyle Kuzma re-signed on December 20th for 3 years worth $40 million, and he got a player option on that final year, which was the 2023-2024 season. It's the first time that's ever happened for a non-max extension. So that's something interesting to think about. It's good for both sides for the Lakers. GM Rob Pelinka figured, we want to give Kuz his security. We want to get him on a reasonable contract because they knew that he wasn't really worth much more than this. And I think even then a lot of people think this is an overpay. But, the offensive upside that Kuz could have, in the following years and even this year for the Lakers trying to repeat, I think there's obviously a lot of potential there. And defensively, I think he still has a lot of room to grow. He's got great size. He just kind of has to stay locked in, and he just needs to. I just feel like he still needs to get more comfortable into the Lakers system. I mean, Frank Vogel's a very good defensive coach and can usually take a lot of guys who aren't defensively minded and place them into that, challenge them and put them into a situation where they're playing defense or they're showing themselves as pretty solid defenders. So I think it's a good thing on both sides, and that player option gives Kuzma some flexibility. Next, Luke Kennard, part of the Clippers, he extends his contract. He just extends for 4 years worth $64 million. It's not necessarily like he extends with the team because he just got traded there, which kind of makes this another one of the more questionable moves or questionable signings at the moment. I mean, it's good because I think the Clippers wanted to just secure his money and not let him go into restricted free agency, where a team, if he had shown himself to be really good this season, could have probably earned a little bit more money. I mean, we saw guys like Joe Ingles get $18 million for 4 years. It's just a little bit of extra money that the Clippers didn't probably want to tack on to their total salary cap right now. So I think it's a good thing that they re-upped him right now. But at the same time, you have no idea what he's going to be like or how he's going to mesh with Kawhi and Paul George yet. So that's something to keep in mind. It's kind of like, You just signed the guy and you just re-extended him, and he didn't have to prove anything for it. So I mean, we all know Luke Kennard's one of those guys who really hasn't gotten the light shown on him that much because he's played in Detroit and he's actually experienced some knee problems the past 2 years. Last 2 seasons, only playing 88 games combined in those 2 seasons, but I think his offensive game is certainly one of the better ones in the NBA. Can shoot the ball at a very high level. You know, one of the more. He's a solid, efficient player, but he struggles defensively, and that's just something that the Clippers are going to give up. But at the end of the day, when you have guys like Kawhi Leonard, a healthier Paul George, Pat Bev when he's not goofing around, you're going to be a better team. And even Serge Ibaka, you can make up the liability that Luke Kennard is on the defensive end. Now, there are 2 signings that the Magic decided to make on December 21st, yesterday. They re-upped Markelle Fultz on a 3-year, $50 million contract. It's just good to see him get his money, especially when he dealt with so many issues in Philadelphia, and he just kind of he went from a guy who had some star potential, and he still could reach that at some point, to a guy who's a role player, but still really developing in the NBA. He's still only in his 4th season, so we have to keep that in mind. But he's making roughly a little bit over $16 million for the next 3 years. I think it's a good starter for them. I mean, this contract could prove to be a little much if he starts to kind of, middle ground and just become an average guy. He doesn't really see a lot of improvement in his game. But once again, the Orlando Magic don't bring in free agents, so kind of taking in a guy like Markelle Fultz there's nothing to lose for them. I mean, they're not going to be an NBA championship team in the next couple of years, so they're definitely not losing anything with that one. And Jonathan Isaac, he re-upped for a pretty lengthy contract for 4 years worth $80 million, so he's making about $20 million for 4 years. Jonathan Isaac, when he's at his best, he's one of the league's best defenders. He's shown his offensive potential in the limited games he's played in the past couple of seasons, and now he just re-injured himself again. So when we see him again, he will be on this contract extension. Once again, like I said with Markelle Fultz, Orlando doesn't have a lot to lose in terms of bringing guys on with big money because, frankly, they don't get free agents, and they're just going to have to work through what they get from the draft. So from a tall, lengthy guy like Jonathan Isaac with a 6'11 frame, I definitely don't think it's a terrible move. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like Markelle Fultz, where this contract is going to show itself in the next couple of years. OG Anunoby re-signed with the Toronto Raptors for 4 years worth $72 million, and I think this is my favorite contract extension I've seen in the past couple days. It's just, OG Anunoby has been one of the more fascinating players to me. Just, we've seen his offensive potential from the start, even during that Kawhi Leonard season, that championship season. I think there was a lot of potential upside with OG Anunoby, and he really showed himself in the season, especially in the NBA bubble. I think OG Anunoby has a lot of offensive potential. He can play off the dribble. He can go off the dribble. He can play in the pick and roll. He's a phenomenal 3-and-D player, but more importantly, he's just a scrappy guy you want on your team. But that 3-and-D ability is something that's super rare in the NBA, and getting that for $18 million for 4 years, I think it's really nice, especially with a lot of still the amounts of potential that OG Anunoby has. And even if he doesn't reach it fully, $18 million for a guy like him is a solid starter in the NBA, or a above average starter is nothing to complain about for sure. And the last extension that I'm not totally sure about, and I was kind of questioning when I saw it at first, was Derek White. He was extended for 4 years worth $73 million. And the reason why I was questioning this a little bit is because I don't watch a lot of Spurs basketball, and I don't necessarily see a lot of Derek White on the court, but when I've seen him play against some of the teams that I've watched, he's a pretty good defender. He's a pretty good role player, really good asset to have on your team, for sure, no doubt about it. His offensive game is still a little questionable. I mean, I've had to check out his stats a little bit. He's shot about under 40% from three. He shot 36% from three, which is all right. His field goal percentages have been okay as well. They're not, too amazing for like calling him a scorer in that regard or anything like that. But his defensive ability, just being able to be a defensive guard, a two-way player, is something that's always important to have in the NBA. Especially, I don't think this is the worst deal because the Spurs aren't necessarily going to be seeing contention for the next couple of seasons, so just kind of seeing what he can do under this contract. And he's definitely shown himself to be a very solid NBA player. I'm just a little surprised that it's this much. It's same as OG Anunoby, and I think OG has a little bit more of an impact, But like I said, if Derek White was on a different team, like the Raptors or another franchise that might be could emphasize, could utilize his two-way ability, I think it could prove me wrong. So I'm not going to say too much about this, but I think at the end of the day that it's a little bit of an overpay. But we're going to see, like I said, this contract's going to have to show itself a little bit. It's 4 years, but it's a definitely lengthy contract for sure. And three players that didn't come to agreements with their extensions were Lauri Markkanen, Lonzo Ball, and John Collins. Lauri Markkanen, he just came off that questionable Jim Boylan season, so I can see why that didn't really come to an agreement, because he probably thought he was worth a little bit more, and the team wasn't looking to give him any money yet until he proves himself. Lonzo Ball, definitely a talented player. He's one of the league's best guard defenders. He can shoot. His percentages, increased dramatically from the Lakers years, but he certainly still needs to prove himself. I don't necessarily think he's taken that next step yet in terms of earning some of the money that he's looking to get, so he's going to have to prove that this season, so I can see why that didn't come to an agreement. But the John Collins one is definitely a little concerning, because it kind of looks like the team's looking to move in a different direction, because I'd assume that John Collins is looking to get a max, and the team obviously wasn't totally ready to give him that. I mean, they did make a lot of commitments to other free agents this summer, and I think it's a little questionable to give Danilo Gallinari $20 million to come off the bench, but that's kind of the thing that's happening right now. So we're going to have to see with the John Collins thing, but that situation. But I could definitely see a world where either sign and trade happens or John Collins is not Atlanta Hawk next year. But another thing to just mention is that these three guys are going to a restricted free agency, which means that they're all going to go into a market where their prices are decided by other teams. If teams throw them money and these guys don't, if these teams that have them right now don't want to extend it, then some of these guys, like the Pelicans, the Bulls, and the Hawks, might just be losing their guys right here. But we're going to have to see on that. But yeah, that's going to be the end of today's video. Like I said, I'm going to likely recap the first two games of the NBA season on opening night today. So stay tuned for that, and I'm out for now.